looking to throw. One-on-one, Davis has it. Touchdown! Carolina wins! Carolina is the Coastal Division champion! Javonte Williams to the left of Howe. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howe looking, standing tall, lets it go, man there! Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol, Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson, he tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted! Surratt intercepts it! Holy cow, Carolina's gonna win! And off to Javonte Williams again, pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back, pressure coming, Aguilar floats it up, incomplete, no flags, head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun, throws to the end zone, incomplete, incomplete, the bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it, 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, with you guys as always. Coming at you live on a Thursday night here as we have got finally a little bit of time to breathe, guys. The portal has been absolutely insane from a Tar Heel perspective over the last 24 hours or so. Really goes back almost 48 hours now since the declaration from Bo Atkinson that he was heading to the portal. And that really set everything off. Carolina then loses 17 players in total to the transfer portal, 13 players that were scholarship players, possibly a 14th, not sure whether or not one of our kickers is on scholarship or not. And so a bunch of stuff that we got to talk about here today. We've got that. We've got, of course, the conversation about the guys that Carolina has added, 3 additions to the class so far here in the spring portal. What do we think about some of those guys? Do we think that they're going to be able to help Carolina? And when would they be able to help Carolina, I think is probably the more important question for some of those guys. And then we do actually have to discuss another guy who is currently in the portal that Carolina's been tied to. They've been crystal balled to now for a few days, but he hasn't committed to Carolina. So what do we make of that? And do we think that the quarterback position really needs someone else added to that room? So we'll have that conversation. Of course, Nico Iamaleava, that'll be lumped into that conversation as well. Did Carolina make a mistake passing on him as he now lands at UCLA? So we'll talk about that. And then, of course, we do have to get into the stuff with Jordon Hudson that came out from The Athletic, some of the stuff that's going on around the program. What do we make of all that? Do we think that it is odd, or do you guys think that it's nothing to worry about? We want to hear your opinions on that as well throughout this edition of the podcast. But let's start with the guys that have entered the transfer portal. And as I mentioned, it is 17 of them since Tuesday night, when Bo Atkinson entered. Zion Ferguson entered his name in as well. And then from there, with the opening of the transfer portal officially yesterday, a bunch of guys started entering their names. Bo Atkinson is the biggest one. There is no doubt this is the toughest pill to swallow. Carolina loses maybe their best defensive player. I know a lot of people were firing back at me for saying that, but I think if you look at how limited his snaps were last year, you look at how limited his snaps have been the last couple of years. What he's done in those limited snaps have been the most impactful of anybody that Carolina had on the defensive side of the ball, still remaining with them this year. And so that's a huge loss for Carolina. And then from there, you lost defensive back Zion Ferguson, second-year player. You lost Zach Rice, who was a fourth-year player along the offensive line, former five-star recruit along that offensive line. You lost the brothers Law, Cade, and Crew, both entering the transfer portal at the linebacker position. Defensive end Mally Hamrick. That's, of course, Malachi Hamrick, just shortened his name. That change took place last year on the roster, and so that's how they refer to him. Kicker/punter Lucas Osada. Wide receiver Gavin Blackwell. Most people may think to themselves, didn't Gavin Blackwell enter in the winter portal? He was a guy that was expected to enter, but apparently did not enter during that time, spent the spring with Carolina, and now has officially entered the portal. Quarterback Ryan Brown, which is one that we certainly have to talk about. Kicker Liam Boyd. Kicker Joffer Murphy. Wide receiver Christian Hamilton. That's a big one as well. Defensive lineman Joel Starlings. Tight end Julian Randolph. And then you got some walk-on guys in quarterback Hudson Wilharm. Offensive tackle Jason Smith II, and linebacker CJ Murphy. All of those guys have entered the transfer portal. But as we mentioned, I think Bo Atkinson, definitely the biggest one. 12 tackles for loss last season, 7.5 sacks. Incredibly impactful for Carolina in limited reps. And this year you expected that his role was only going to continue to grow. So when you look at Bo Atkinson entering the transfer portal, how impactful do you think this is going to be? Because I was told earlier today on the air on the show that I do for WFNZ, the Weston Walker Show, this loss means nothing. They should easily be able to make up 7.5 sacks and 12 tackles for loss, especially since that production came mostly against some bottom-tier teams in the ACC.
Yeah, then those guys don't frankly know what they're talking about. Bo Atkinson, the production came in bunches, but you're talking about a guy that it felt like whenever he was on the field was impactful and felt like a guy as much as anybody on that defensive side of the football that was poised to take a really big step under Bill Belichick, under his son Steve Belichick, and this new defensive staff in 2025. And I think what you look at why he's leaving is probably the most concerning. You look at the two schools that he's linked to, Georgia and Ohio State, it would lead you to believe that as much as anything, there's a financial reason as to why he's looking to leave the UNC football program. And this comes after, the hiring of Bill Belichick, where we got told there's going to be $20 million available to help build, construct, and retain a football roster on an annual basis. And the fact that I think Bo is looking to go somewhere else, and you look at those two schools and the money that they have at their disposal, that would lead you to believe that that money may not be there for Carolina. Because I find it hard to believe that would be a guy that Bill Belichick would be willing to let walk away. There are some of the guys that you went over that were probably inevitable spring transfer portal guys. They had to be guys staff had to get into practice, evaluate, coach, and then make that decision. That to me is not what Bo Atkinson is. This guy, I think, was poised to be a leader for this defense, be a leader for this football team. And now you're losing that. And you brought in a good pass rusher and Price Yates out of UConn, but one's not enough, man. The best defenses in the country, whether, at the ACC level or not, they have multiple pass rushers that they know they can count on. And right now, Carolina, with the loss of Bo Atkinson, does not have that on its roster, and could be a big role in what this defense ultimately looks like later this fall.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the worst case scenario. You had a guy that was looking as if he was on the precipice of being something special. Again, when you go back to how many reps he played last season, this was a guy that, didn't have a starting job for Carolina until the bowl game against UConn. That was his first ever career start as it was logged. Now you could say that maybe that's flawed or whatever, but he still, he played 381 snaps a year ago for Carolina and had 25 total pressures. That is an incredible pressure rate. And you look at how he graded out across, some of the Pro Football Focus stuff. His pass rush grade was a 76.2, easily the highest on the team a year ago. His run defense grade was a 74.3, so a really good run defender as well. along with the fact that he could get after the quarterback. And yeah, his production came against some of the weaker teams in the ACC, but hey, at least someone was producing during that time. Also, remember that early in the season, he graded out well in some of the games that Carolina played when Jahvaree Ritzie was the guy that was eating on the inside as well. So there are plays where he was getting pressure on the quarterback, just like Jahvaree Ritzie was, and Jahvaree Ritzie was the guy that was coming away with the sacks and the accolades. I think he is truly one of the most special guys that Carolina had on this defense. I think when you look at it, it's either him or Amari Campbell that was the best player on this defense returning. And I think even with the additions that Carolina made in the offseason, now I may be proven wrong on Thaddeus Dixon because I haven't watched as much of him, especially with the fact that Washington wasn't nearly as good as they were the year before last year. I mean, look, I think that you look at what Bo Atkinson did. I mean, it's hard to find another guy on this roster that will be able to replicate that. I think Bryce Yates, yeah, that's a nice addition for Carolina. Do I think that he's a better player than Bo Atkinson? I don't think so. You could argue that Bryce Yates stacked up his sacks as well, including in the game against Carolina in the bowl game, where you had two true freshmen starting along the offensive line at the tackle spots. So, I mean, that's the thing. You can pick and choose, which stats you want to criticize and everything like that and pick apart. But I think when we watch this dude, I think, like you said, you could really just tell how impactful he was. And he was a guy that was impactful the other night, again, during the practice like a pro event, where Carolina was needing someone along that defensive end, at that defensive end spot, to get after the quarterback, someone to help in run defense. And when he was on the field, you could tell that Carolina's defense was better. He was the one that was making plays for Carolina. Inside Carolina told us that he was one of the guys that had one of the most impactful nights. It was really hard to tell who was who out there without the jersey numbers. Thank you, Bill Belichick. But I do think that, when you hear that he was as impactful as anybody was in that event as well, it really makes you wonder, how is Carolina going to adjust without him? Now, I think, honestly, it puts a lot of pressure on Bryce Yates to be the guy that we thought he was going to be. Milcart Abu-Jowdy is a guy that now probably has to start for Carolina unless they go and find someone in the transfer portal. And again, that was another area. I was told that they should be able to find someone in the transfer portal pretty easily to be able to cover this type of production. I mean, I don't know about you. I haven't seen anybody enter the transfer portal yet at the edge rusher position that I've said, this is the guy, this is the perfect guy to be able to take over for Bo Atkinson because of the type of production that he brings to the table.
Yeah, let's remind these people that are giving these types of opinions. This is the spring transfer portal. This isn't the winter. And we got to remember, when Carolina hired Bill Belichick, they were behind the eight ball adding talent to the roster anyway, because he got hired on December 11th. Like, by that point, a lot of the top guys in the portal had already found their new homes. And so Carolina was, kind of building, try what you were really wanting to see them build, add depth to the roster, and position themselves for next year to be big-time players in the portal. But when you lose a guy like this, it's not easy to go and replace him. And so right now it's a major concern, I think, for Carolina, just because there isn't that clear-cut guy that's in the portal right now that we can tell Bill Belichick, Michael Lombardi, hey, you need to bring him in here, and we'll feel a lot better about where this defense is, heading into the summer when we're gearing up for fall practice come late July, early August. So we'll have to wait and see. I mean, I think this has been a more active spring portal than what we've seen in years past. Maybe a guy or two enters that could really pave the way for Carolina to go land. But let's not make a mistake about this. It wasn't like Carolina had the type of transfer portal haul we envisioned them having anyway. After the Bill Belichick hire, they brought in the two transfers from Washington. I know people are very high on, but I was one of the guys that believed they'd be able to kind of get the pick of the litter. Whoever they wanted, they'd be able to come in and bring it to the program. That was not the case. And so even if those players emerge, it's not clear cut that they're going to come to Chapel Hill and play for Bill Belichick anyway. So as of this moment, it's a big void on this roster, and it's a headache the staff will have to spend the rest of the offseason trying to find an answer for, because It's not going to be easy to replace that production, even if some people might think it is.
All right. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, again, I think the guys that are on the roster now, and you got Smith Vilbert, the transfer from Penn State, who was a rotational guy there last year, they're expecting that he is going to take a big step, I guess, and become a guy that can consistently get after the quarterback. But again, I mean, you're talking about a guy from Delaware who was decently productive, didn't even put up the type of numbers that Bo Atkinson did last year. And then you've got a guy in Smith Vilbert who, never really was a steady producer there, played, a decent amount of snaps for Penn State, but was never really a full-time starter for them. You could say that, that's the same thing that you lost in a guy like Bo Atkinson, but Bo Atkinson was expected to start this year and was much, much more productive in his time there. I mean, for Vilbert, he had just has just 4 career sacks, and 3 of those sacks came back in 2021. I mean, you got to think that last year was his most productive year in terms of snaps on the field. He played 339 snaps and had just 6 quarterback pressures the entire season. He also was a guy that, you look at his pass rush grade, 66.1, solid. His run defense grade, 61.7, solid. But these are not the numbers that you're going to need from a starter. So Carolina's got to find it from somewhere. Hopefully some of the young guys can step up. This is where you're looking at a guy like Tyler Thompson, who's been in the system for a couple of years, Jabron Harvey potentially, maybe even a guy like Daniel Anderson, who was with the team last year. But somebody is going to have to step up at that position. And I believe Carolina should be aggressive in going into the portal and getting someone that has some sort of production at that edge rusher spot. Now, the question is with the rest of the guys, I mean, yeah, you brought up some of the guys that I think a lot of people look at and may be concerned about. To me, off the air when we were talking earlier today, I think Christian Hamilton is certainly a guy that people liked. They saw some potential from him this past season when he started the first 4 games of the year for Carolina, then ends up getting hurt and never really regained his spot as a key part of what Carolina was doing outside at wide receiver. And then, I think the other guy that is certainly worth talking about here in terms of what he was able to do production-wise, what we were able to see from him at Carolina, which was a whole lot of nothing, was Zach Rice. I think that's the other big name that you talk about here outside of quarterback. We'll get to that in a second and talk about the quarterback spot just in general. But I think those were the 2 other significant names that entered. For me, Zach Rice, not shocking. I think it was only a matter of time. I got to be honest, I'm shocked he even wrote it out this long. But Christian Hamilton, I think, is certainly a guy that Carolina fans have a right to be a little frustrated with the fact that he's gone. But I think part of it may be that we're seeing some other guys step up at that receiver position, and that could be part of the reason why he's deciding it's time for him to go elsewhere.
Yeah, this is where not hearing from Bill Belichick, Michael Lombardi throughout the entire spring does make you just wonder why. Because, when you look at Christian Hamilton, that's a guy that, had the potential last year to be a deep threat in this passing game. And yes, it was early that he emerged and flashed, but that's still something that this roster, you would still think going into this year, not knowing what this offense, by the way, is going to look like, what the design of the offense is supposed to look like, you would still want to have that on your roster. You look at Zach Rice, you're talking about arguably one of the most underwhelming recruits to ever come through this program. At least I know in our lifetime, that was a guy that, was one of the first really big wins for Mac Brown when he got back at Carolina and was really evaluating the in-state recruiting and was starting to turn the tide to where you thought he could build a roster to compete for an ACC championship by recruiting the top guys in the state of North Carolina, going to the pipelines of Virginia and Georgia, and then maybe going somewhere else to get the top talent in the country. And that guy just never translated. That guy never showed up in Chapel Hill. So it's unfortunate. I don't know if expectations were too high, or maybe this was just one of those dudes that, the step up from high school to college was too much for him to really overcome and make a mark at this level. It'd be interesting to see where he lands because as a former 5-star, you know that there's going to be some power conference programs that are interested. So you look at those two guys as clear. I think, big losses for different reasons, just because you're losing a potential deep threat in your passing game and you're losing a 5-star offensive lineman. You know how important offensive line depth is, even in college football. So, those two losses, I think, kind of, they're not as big as Bo Atkinson, but they're still, I think, pretty significant losses as we sit here early in spring.
Yeah, I mean, with Christian Hamilton, I think what you're hoping is that Culliver has finally broken out and that he's the guy that takes over. Again, would have been nice to know who we were watching the other night at the Practice Like a Pro event, at the version of the spring game that Carolina had this year. Because if we would have seen that and saw that, oh, he's playing well, then it makes a little bit more sense. If maybe Jordan Shipp is a guy that's playing better on the outside, maybe he's not necessarily that deep threat. That's not what we saw a lot from him in the high school level, but he is certainly someone that can do that. Paul Billups II, another guy who could be one of those deep threats. It would have been nice to be able to tell who was actually playing and who wasn't, because if Christian Hamilton wasn't out there, then it would have made sense to us. Okay, this is a guy that's been passed over on the roster. Or, Chris Culliver is balling out. He's the guy that's going to be the deep threat on the outside. Christian Hamilton really isn't going to see that much time. This makes a lot more sense why he's entering the transfer portal. Now, we're sitting here just kind of wondering what's going on. Why is he entering the transfer portal? Was he one of the guys that was playing well out there the other day at receiver that all of a sudden Carolina is now losing to the portal? When it comes to Zach Rice, I mean, for him, the most underwhelming recruit probably ever to come through Chapel Hill, because you're talking about a 5-star player who played 44 snaps on the offensive side of the ball in his career. And most of those came in late game situations. He never really played in an important moment. Special teams, he played 141 snaps over the last 2 years. So that was really where he saw more of his time. But that's not what you're looking for when you get a 5-star guy out of the state of Virginia that you were hoping would strengthen that pipeline, which now is pretty much non-existent, was non-existent even under Mack Brown in the final couple of years under him. That certainly was not what you were hoping he would turn out to be. For him, landing at a spot, I would like to see him at a spot like Liberty. I think that would probably be the perfect fit for him. First of all, really close to home. He was out in that area of Virginia, not necessarily the 757, but he still, I think, is a guy that has some potential. But if he lands at Liberty and he gets an opportunity to play, I do think that Zach Rice could be a guy that eventually breaks out and becomes the type of player that we saw. And I think that would really be one of those things where, especially if it happens with a Power 5 program, I think that's when you start to point back to Mack Brown and his staff and you say, how much development was actually going on with some of these offensive and defensive linemen? Because that's been the areas where we've seen a lot of these highly touted guys that just have turned out to be nothing, that have turned out to, for some of them, not play any sort of role at all. That's more on the offensive side of the ball. Remember that along with Zach Rice, I don't remember if it was his class or if it was a different class, Eli Sutton, 4-star offensive tackle, comes in. Never played a significant snap for Carolina as well. So, as bad as some of the development was on the defensive side of the ball, at least some of those guys were seeing the field. Des Evans wasn't what we expected, but he saw the field. Javari Ritzie wasn't what we expected, but he saw the field. These are guys that didn't even touch the playing surface at Carolina during important times. And it's something that we certainly have to look at when it comes to Mack Brown. Now let's talk about the quarterback spot, because now you got Ryan Brown in the transfer portal. He's basically going back to Purdue. Should have never left Purdue. Probably should have just stayed there. He would have been there in the spring and could have won their starting job. Now he's going to have to go back and win their starting job in August. And now it leaves Carolina without the guy that was probably the leader in their quarterback battle, because you go back to Saturday night, he was the guy that was taking the snaps with the first team for the majority of the first practice. And so, or first half of practice rather. This is somewhat significant, because I believe that eventually Bryce Baker probably ends up beating him out. And that's part of the reason why he ends up transferring. But you also talk about the Tar Heels looking elsewhere and looking at other quarterbacks. That probably led to this as well. So a bit of a shocking move, but I think with everything that was going on around Carolina and with, a little bit of a rough showing, especially as the night went on from Ryan Brown in the practice like a pro event, it makes a little bit more sense why he ends up entering the transfer portal.
Yeah, I think it was in John Talty's report that came out earlier this week for CBS Sports. And Carolina was known to be a school that was going to be in the market, this portal, looking for a quarterback. So I guess that tells you that they don't think Bryce Baker is ready to be the guy, and they did not see what they wanted to see from Ryan Brown in the spring to let him be the first quarterback to play under Bill Belichick. So, him going back to Purdue, you see this really a lot of times where a kid transfers away, they go to a different situation, they don't like it, whatever, then they end up going back to where they were, which is one of the big issues I think that this portal has, is that a lot of times guys are not making the best decisions for themselves in the short term or in the long term. Whereas you mentioned, if he probably stays at Purdue, sees through that coaching change, goes through spring practice, would probably be ready to be QB1 for the Boilermakers this upcoming season. Now we'll have to go back to a program where, yes, there's familiarity, but have to start over and try to win that job when fall practice begins. So really interested to see, what Carolina ends up doing at quarterback. I was so under the impression and under the belief that this year was a foundation year for Bill Belichick, where if Carolina were to win a significant number of games, cool, that's fantastic. That no one's going to sit here and complain about that. But I thought this year was all about getting Bryce Baker established as the future of your program, being your quarterback, starting against TCU, and being here for the next 3 years at least. And that may ultimately end up still being what happens, but it does appear that they have a different plan with the fact that they were going to be active in the portal this spring looking for a quarterback regardless of what Baker was doing in the spring. So it'll be real interested to see what ultimately shakes out of that quarterback spot. Baker was a big-time recruit for Belichick to land when he got hired. He is a four-star was a four-star prospect. So was Sam Howell coming out of high school. It's not unfamiliar to see those guys start right away and be difference makers. So I think this is right up there with what's more important than the edge rusher with them losing Bo Atkinson. What Carolina does at quarterback and the rest of this offseason, I think, is really going to tell us kind of what we could be in store for 2005 in terms of on-field results.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that, Baker, I thought the other night he looked pretty solid. I thought he had good moments, especially late in the practice, and that was what was most encouraging to me, was I thought as the night went along and as he started to play with the first-team offensive line, I really felt like that was where you started to see him shine. And that would make sense. Yeah, the second-team offensive line is nowhere near this. The first-team offensive line has its own issues. They're still going to have to pass protect better than the way that they did the other night. They have to. It wasn't good enough. So, I mean, the fact that he was behind that second-team offensive line, and what showed me it too is that then you see Ryan Brown go with the second-team offensive line and was completely ineffective. Carolina didn't do anything. The ball was not moving pretty much the rest of the night for Ryan Brown when he was out there because that second-team offensive line was not getting the job done. I get it. People said that he was holding on to the ball for a long time. That's something that you got to get used to at the college level because when you're in high school, you can hold on to the ball for a while. If you got a good offensive line, you can stand back there all day. And that's what he had. And that's why he was able to succeed the way that he was. But the talent is there. You saw it. Incredibly accurate. I thought his deep passing was much, much better than Ryan Brown's. I think there's a lot to like there. Doesn't have as strong of an arm as you saw from Sam Howell or Drake May, but I do think, or even Jacoby Criswell. But the thing about Jacoby Criswell and what we saw, same thing with Ryan Brown, is that these guys are not necessarily accurate down the field. And you've got to have that accuracy. And that's one thing that he has. I thought most of his passes were very accurate when he got them off. And I thought that, as the night went along, especially once they got into the red zone stuff, that was really where he started to shine. I mean, he was the guy that pretty much won the last drill for the offense, the way that he was moving the ball. Yeah, the kickers had to step in and make some field goals as well, but he was the one that was able to actually move the offense a little bit. So I think there is something there with him. I think if you went back and you nitpicked Sam Howell and watched him in his first spring practice that we saw, or the spring game that they played back then, you would probably think similar things. You would think he holds on to the ball too long, because that was Sam's biggest issue. That's still Sam's biggest issue at the NFL level, is that he holds on to the ball forever. And it leads to sacks and it leads to turnovers because he plays hero ball. I didn't get that with Bryce Baker. I got a guy that was maybe a little too hesitant at times, which makes sense why you would want to bring in someone to compete with him. But let's get to the guy that Carolina's talking to. Gio Lopez, the transfer out of South Alabama. And this is a guy that's entering the transfer portal to be a starter. He is entering the portal to go somewhere and become a starter. And this is a dude that has 3 years of eligibility remaining. So if you bring him in and you're expecting him to be your starter, you can basically say goodbye to Bryce Baker. Why is Bryce Baker hanging around for 3 years to then get a shot to be the starting quarterback for 2 years? I don't see it happening. So you run the risk of potentially chasing away a guy that could still be a generational quarterback based off of what he was in high school, for a guy that, look, there are some things to like about Gio Lopez. I think he has that gamer in him. I see some of Sam Howell in him in the way that he runs. I like the arm strength. I think it's there. And he was a guy that made plays and helped lead a pretty good South Alabama offense last year. But are you prepared to potentially lose Bryce Baker over a guy that we don't really know what his ceiling is going to be? I don't think it's as high as Bryce Baker's is at this level.
Yeah, I think that's the big question is, like, if this was a guy that was in his 4th or 5th year, maybe it makes some sense. Bill Belichick brings him in, puts him in a situation to maybe win right away, as opposed to building the program up like I've been talking about. That's not the case, though, with Gio Lopez. This is a guy that's going to look to start at a place and look to start for multiple seasons, when in this day and age, there's no reason for a guy like Bryce Baker, who was heavily recruited, to sit behind him and wait, where he could go somewhere else and A, play, and B, get paid a significant amount of money to play. So just concerned because we don't know the messaging and we don't know the reasoning. Other than the fact that, as I mentioned, John Talty said this was expected in that report I referenced earlier. But I looked at the film. I could see why they're interested. I could see that there is talent there. There is upside there. He does throw, I think, a pretty effortless deep ball. He's got the ability to be mobile and all that. So, which I think, this offense is going to want and it's going to need if it's really going to be as effective as you want it to be. But I see all those things in Bryce Baker, man, where I think you protect him. I think he'll be able to throw the football down the field. I think there's mobility there to where he can use his legs when he has to, when he wants to, whether they're in design runs, whenever he's just trying to make something happen when a play breaks down. So I don't want to be like 100% against the move, but I would just hate to see a guy like Bryce Baker, someone that was so coveted on the recruiting trail, commit to basically get recruited over in his first spring with the program and effectively leave after one season. So, I guess, we were told on late Monday, early Tuesday, this was going to happen. We're sitting here on Thursday and it hasn't happened. So maybe those talks have stalled. Maybe those talks have changed. But regardless, it does appear that Carolina is going to look to add a quality starter at quarterback this offseason, one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, so what do you make of that? The fact that they are still waiting on him. Do you think that they could possibly be reconsidering? Because I'm with you. I think that if you want to bring in a quarterback, that's fine. Can we bring in a guy that has 1 or 2 years left? Not a guy that's coming in here to take over for the majority of the time that you're expecting Bill Belichick to be here, and basically, effectively kicking Bryce Baker and his career out of Carolina in order to clear space for this player.
Yeah, look, if there was to be a junior or senior that Carolina was going after that you knew was only going to play college football for one more year, I probably wouldn't be as upset about it. Okay, let Bryce Baker sit, learn the offense, adjust to college, adjust to being coached by Bill Belichick, all that fun stuff. So if that's the route they end up going, I won't complain about it. It doesn't, but if you go the Gio Lopez route, I think I will be a little frustrated with it. I do wonder if money was an issue, if that is the issue, what's holding up? Because there were 7, 8 guys that are tied into covering the portal as well as anybody, around the country that was reporting on Monday. This was a done deal that he was expected to commit to Carolina upon entering the portal officially on Wednesday. I don't know if the Nico situation played a role just in terms of what he was able to get it in an NIL deal. If they were looking to counter that and at least get something similar. Because Carolina was not willing to meet the $4 million threshold. Nico lands at UCLA for $1.75. You'd think Carolina would have that if they're looking to add a starter in the spring portal. So we'll have to wait and see. They need to add a quarterback just for depth purposes now.
Yep.
But I prefer them adding a veteran, more of a tutor to Bryce Baker as opposed to a guy that's going to come in, compete, and potentially start over him right away.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. And I mean, you look at Gio Lopez last year, I mean, solid numbers, 2,559 yards, 18-5 touchdown to interception ratio, ran for 463 yards and 7 touchdowns. My thing is that he did that at the group of 5 level. And yes, South Alabama's offense was pretty good under Major Applewhite. That is a much different offense that you're running there than the one that you're going to run here. So he's not coming from a similar system, which would be something that would make sense if you're trying to get someone that sort of fits more of the pro style system. He came from a wide open offense. So there's going to be a learning curve there for him when it comes to that. And those numbers are not mind blowing. Like, to me, if you're going after a guy with those types of numbers, why would you not go after the guy that put up those types of numbers in the SEC, especially at a $1.7 million mark? Now, we don't know if that was what was presented to Carolina. Maybe if he's going to go to Carolina, they want more. They understood by the time that Carolina bowed out and Tulane bowed out that they weren't going to get that money, and they came down to that 1.7 figure that you mentioned earlier. For UCLA. But I mean, if that's one that you can revisit, I would almost rather you revisit Nico Iamaleava, who I'm not a huge fan of, by the way. I don't think that is a guy that Carolina should go after either, because again, you're talking about another guy that's a sophomore, a guy that's going to be there for 3 years in your program, you'd imagine, unless he just has some sort of breakout season, which I do think is more possible with him, a former 5-star that could allow a path for Bryce Baker to be able to stay with you and potentially play in the future for you. I would almost rather that than go with Gio Lopez. But I think that most people would probably disagree with me on that.
Yeah, I mean, I have no interest in bringing in Nico Iamaleava. And it's for 2 reasons. I mean, I don't think you want the headache that his dad is in and around your program. Mm-hmm. And then let's just say the quiet part out loud. He was one of the more underwhelming players in the country a year ago. And you're talking about, yes, a quarterback from an SEC program that led his team to the playoff. And I don't want to say that it was in spite of him, but it was as good as Dylan Sampson was, as good as that defense was. You just need to have someone that can manage games. And that's what he did. And we saw how explosive that offense has been at Tennessee under Josh Heupel the previous 2 to 3 seasons. And they were nothing close to that a year ago. And the big reason why was the quarterback. And where, if he were to transition to Carolina doesn't have the same offensive skill position talent that Tennessee has. They're not as good up front as Tennessee has. They're not as good defensively as Tennessee was. Like, you would have asked him to come in here and win you games and go out and score 35, 38, 42 points on a probably semi-regular occurrence. And I don't know if he's capable of doing that. And when you combine that just with what his dad is and what his dad has become, he would have become as big a distraction off the field as anything around the Tar Heel football program right now. So to me, it was never what the money was. I know he's a former 5-star talent, and maybe in a better situation he could have produced more. But I watched a handful of big games Tennessee played in last year, and even the games they won, I did not come away impressed with him. So as long as Carolina doesn't circle back around, I think they dodged a bullet and a guy that's going to be one of the more interesting players to follow after he was calling up Oregon back in December, trying to have them poach him away from Tennessee then for the money he was looking for. He doesn't get that, and we'll see what his career ultimately looks like in UCLA, because I don't think he's ever going to live to that 5-star billing he had coming out of high school.
Yeah, I mean, look, with all the other stuff, I wouldn't want him. There's no doubt in my mind that I think staying away from him is the best thing, and rolling with Bryce Baker would make more sense. But the numbers are literally comparable to what you got from Gio Lopez, and he did it in the SEC. Like, I'm sorry, that means more to me than doing it in the Sun Belt. If that doesn't, then I don't know what to tell you. Like, you should not be like, my thing is I think that Tar Heel fans are over the moon about Gio Lopez, and I think there are some people in sports media that like him. Cooper Patagonia, I think I might have gotten his name wrong, but the guy from 24/7 Sports, I mean, he talked about how much he really likes this guy and thinks that there's plenty of potential there for him. But my thing is if the numbers were better, if you were talking about a guy that even had like a 26-5 touchdown to interception ratio, I think then we're having a conversation. I mean, this is a guy that was on a team that won 6 games this year, and when he was the starter. Now, he was 6-5, and, he ended up missing a game due to injury, but who knows if they end up winning that other game. It's just the numbers don't blow me away, and that's what concerns me a little bit about him now making the transition and having to play in a tougher conference in the ACC week in and week out when Bryce Baker is right there. And the thing is if you're going to bring this guy in and pay him, a significant amount of money, if that's what he's wanting, what happens if Bryce Baker beats him out? You're going to pay that guy to sit on your bench for 3 years or even just 1 year? I don't know if that's necessarily what you're hoping. And to me, when you talked about that report from John Talty that said that Carolina is desperate trying to bring in a quarterback, I mean, yeah, if they're desperate trying to bring in a quarterback, they're trying to bring in a starter. You're not going into the portal. You're not being as desperate as Carolina has been, being in contact with basically any significant name that has entered, if you are not going to roll with that person as your starter. So really quickly, let's talk about the guys that Carolina has landed in the portal. You've got linebacker Mekhi Gabor, the transfer from Missouri, who comes in. You've got wide receiver Adrian Wilson out of Colorado, and punter Jacob Horvath out of Eastern Illinois. Gabor was the guy that sort of led everything off for Carolina. 2-year starter at Nebraska before transferring earlier this offseason to Missouri. Last year had 49 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, a sack, 3 passes defense, and 2 fumble recoveries while playing 375 defensive snaps and 130 special team snaps. So a guy that was a starter, but does have the ability to rotate in and out. That's something that Carolina certainly can value. You got wide receiver Adrian Wilson, who last season as a senior in high school caught 47 passes for 985 yards and 14 touchdowns while helping his high school finish 8-3. The years prior, did have 927 receiving yards and 14 touchdowns as a junior, and 547 yards and 8 touchdowns as a sophomore. Thing about him is that he arrived at Colorado back in December, was with the team for spring practice, and is already transferring before his true freshman season even begins. So 4 years of eligibility for Carolina, but this is a guy that before he even committed to Colorado, which he did last October, he was committed to 3 other schools. So he has already been committed to 5 schools now before even playing a snap of college football. We've seen it with these types of guys before. Things never really seem to work out. So that'll be interesting to see what happens with him. I think as a 4-star prospect, former 4-star prospect coming out, there is talent there. And this is a guy that could end up being a really good player for Carolina. But I thought if they were going into the portal, they would be looking for a receiver with a little bit of experience. And then punter, Jacob Horvath, this is a guy that has some experience. In 2023, as a freshman, averaged just 38.1 yards per punt on 55 punts, with 4 of those kicks going more than 50 yards. This year, as a sophomore, much better. Was named a second-team All-Big South and OVC member. They have a combined conference, if you're wondering why that is like that. After he averaged 44.1 yards per punt and landed 12 inside the 20 and had 15 go more than 15 yards out of his 54 punts. That's pretty good, a market improvement there. And I think this is the perfect type of competition for Tom McGinnis. It might not be a guy that is for sure taking over for McGinnis, who has, reportedly improved this offseason, but I think it gives him just enough of a push. And this is a guy that is more than capable, it looks like, hopefully, of making that step up. I mean, punting, that's one of those positions that you hope that there's not nearly as steep of a learning curve as there is with some other positions. So hopefully he will translate to the next level, and this could be your guy if you don't get what you're expecting out of Tom McGinnis. Out of those 3 guys, which one do you think is the most important one that Carolina has added?
It might be a weird answer. I'll go Adrian Wilson just because you lost Christian Hamilton, you lost Gavin Blackwell. You look at his numbers with his catches and yardage. It feels like every time he touches the ball, it's something explosive, and it's not going to be a guy that's going to be a possession type receiver. This is going to be a guy that you're going to put the ball in his hands, and you're going to expect him to make something big happen. And Carolina, I think, is going to need that in their offense. They need big play potential, just because it's really hard to just grind out drives. It's really hard to just methodically move the football up and down the field. You got to be able to score and score quickly. But I think you look at all 3 transfers that Carolina brought in, and you see why they did so. You're adding a linebacker with starting experience from the Big Ten, who can play special teams. Belichick will love that. That's a Belichick type of guy, a guy that can impact the game in more than one way. So I just spoke about Adrian Wilson, and then you look at Horvath, talking about a guy that improved his punting average in terms of yards per punt, but also proved he can kick the ball a far away, but also keep it inside the 20. And I think that's one thing that you're really going to see Carolina want to really stress more than ever, is being really good in the kicking game. And because there's going to be games where field position is going to determine it. And Carolina's lost those games previously under Mac Brown because they just could not, flip field position, or B, not be able to do so without putting the ball in the back of the end zone for a touchback. This guy seems to have a big leg, but a controlled leg. And I think he's, as you mentioned, perfect competition for Tom McGinnis. And I think he's a guy that if he shows up and is the first guy out there punting the ball in the season opener against TCU, you're not going to be surprised. So, I think these are 3 transfers that you look at and say make a lot of sense, and all 3 could play a role for Carolina in more ways than one later this fall.
Yeah, I think the one that probably has the most impact early on is Horvath. I really do think he's going to beat out McGinnis, because I saw McGinnis again the other night, and, it wasn't against, a full rush or anything like that, and still didn't seem like he was getting nearly the distance that he was wanting to on his punts. I think Horvath is the guy that's coming in to challenge him. And when you have 15 punts over 50 yards, I feel like that is the type of leg that you're wanting at punter. So I think he'll be the guy this year that makes the biggest impact. But I'm with you. I think it's Adrian Wilson. I think it's that big play receiver. There's a reason that he was a 4-star prospect. I think he's going to be the guy that eventually becomes the biggest threat for Carolina, and could be, a future starter at wide receiver. I think it's going to take him a little bit of time, but I do think that the wide receiver spot is probably still a little open right now for guys to step up and potentially earn some reps this season. I wouldn't expect him to start, especially coming in at the time of year that he is. But I do think that he's a guy that, especially since he's going to be a Belichick guy, as the season goes along, if he can make some explosive plays for Carolina, if he gets on the field and makes some things happen, watch out for him to potentially be a guy, in the future that Carolina uses a little bit more. All right, really quickly on the way out here, there was an article that was written in The Athletic by Matt Baker that came out earlier this week, talking about some of the off-the-field stuff that's going on and the involvement of Jordon Hudson in the Tar Heel football program. And this is something that you have been talking to me about sort of on the side, off camera for the last, few months, really, since, we found out how involved she was going to be, really, since we got the news that she was being tagged on every email that Belichick was sending. And for the most part, I said, that a little weird, no doubt about that. But I do think that, everything else was pretty much normal. Like, to me, the trips to the beach, all that kind of stuff, whatever, man. Coaches are going to have their off time. They're going to do whatever they want. But then we get this article that comes out, and we see some really weird stuff in here about her trying to control, the narrative around Bill Belichick and Stephen Belichick. Asked that they do not refer to them as father and son because they do not want people accusing them of nepotism. If there are people that are saying any sort of stuff like that, they want all of those comments deleted off of posts. And then there is one incident in particular that really stuck out to me, when there is an email that is sent by Jordon Hudson asking for a specific account or a specific post on their Facebook account to be looked at, close to Valentine's Day, pointing to, her and Bill's relationship. And apparently there being people on there talking about Bill being a predator or something like that. Bill then eventually responds on Valentine's Day and asks whether or not the person, Robbie Pickrell Evans, whether or not he supports, or I believe it is a he, could be a she, whether or not that person supports this notion that he is a predator, if the university supports that, all sorts of crazy, crazy stuff. And so I thought we would talk about it here as to, when you look at her involvement in the program, when you look at her involvement with Bill Belichick and how it may affect him, where is your concern level right now with Jordon Hudson being as involved as she is with the program? Not to mention the clip that came out the other day of her clipping on his microphone for him before the Practice Like a Pro event.
Yeah, I'll basically reiterate what I've been saying for the past 2.5, 3 months. If she's going to be this involved and this hands-on, that's fine. We need to put her on payroll because she's effectively running a lot of Bill's stuff off the field. Like, she's probably in charge of his Facebook or his Instagram and his Twitter accounts. No issue with that, because I bet you she knows how to navigate both those social media platforms better than Bill. And those things are important in this day and age of recruiting and having a social media presence. Some of the other stuff, though, with how you're telling, the sports information director how to do their job, her being tagged in and included on every single email, like, she's involved. And if that's what Bill Belichick wants, fine. Put her on the payroll. Just make her a part of the football staff. Create her role. I don't know what the title needs to be. I can't give you that. But if she's going to be this involved optically, it would look better if she was being paid to do so. Because whether this is right or wrong, I don't know. This will become a talking point if Carolina loses. And I can say this, and we can say this as someone that worked in Charlotte. And when the Panthers have had bad years, they've complained about Nicole Tepper being at practice. Well, she's at practice. Like, she was very comfortable the other night being on that field during that practice event while Bill Belichick's in his coaching element, helping him put on his microphone. I'm not so convinced she's not going to be on the sidelines during games, because it feels like at every turn she gets what she wants. Look, we've given Belichick all the power. We've given him all the leverage. Like, that's what happens when you make the type of hire that you make, when you give him the type of money that you gave him. But at the end of the day, we made the hire that we made, and we invested in him financially to win football games and to win at a high level. Like, this was not a hire that Carolina made just for clicks. This is a hire that Carolina made because they are committing as much to football as they ever have in our lifetimes. And so I just want to make sure that on the back end, Bill Belichick is doing what he needs to do from an optic situation to lower the distractions and lower the noise that are going to be around this program. Because Carolina is going to be a talking point every Saturday on College Game Day. They're going to be a talking point every Sunday when SportsCenter and these shows are recapping the weekend that was in college football. They're going to be a talking point on every national podcast that covers a sport because of who they hired. And if she's got this type of involvement and Carolina's winning, then we'll just laugh it off. Mm-hmm. If she's having this type of involvement and Carolina is losing, and let's say Belichick struggles through a 3-9 or a 4-8 season, really shows and struggles to adapt to the college game, this storyline is only going to continue to grow. So if she's going to have this type of presence within the program, okay, then just put her on payroll, because then it gets a little bit less questioned, and it's just not as awkward if she's a member of the staff in some capacity, as opposed to basically, like, it's almost like she's like his keeper, and that if she was not there, could our 74-year-old head football coach, could he function without her? Like, that's the feeling you get when you see them interact, and when you see all the things that she has been involved with so far. Like, he got the commercial during the Super Bowl, but that came at the price of, well, Bill's only doing the commercial if I'm doing the commercial. The Hard Knock stuff, Mike Florio reported that fell through because of her wanting editorial control over what was being sent out. Why should we not believe that with what we just saw last week be reported in the Athletic? So
100% believe that. That is 100% true, because she is listed as the, quote, CEO or COO, of Belichick Productions. There's only one
business, by the way.
There's one
does not exist.
Doesn't exist. So it really starts to make you wonder, what is going on here? Why is she so involved? Why does she have to be so hands-on with all of this stuff? The social media stuff does not bother me in the slightest, because she is someone who has had to sell herself on social media for these pageants and everything like that. She knows the involvement that it takes. Now, I will say for her, here's the thing. They're going to delete comments that are calling him a predator, stuff like that, that's on the main account. Other than that, there's nothing that they can really control. If people are putting that narrative out there, there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to ignore it. You can't be that focused on every comment that's on there. Yes, the ones on the main accounts on Go Heels, the ones that are on the football, Twitter and the football team page on Facebook. Yes, those are ones that you should want to have taken down immediately. Hidden, block the user, whatever. But at the same time, I mean, the fact that Bill flies off the handle and says, "What do you support this?" Come on, dude. Are you being serious right now? That shows me you're letting her get in your head. Because if you really believe that Carolina, because they may have missed one, whoever this person is that runs the account or something like that, that they support that, I mean, you've got to be kidding me. You can't be that fragile. When you are a 70-something-year-old dude who's dating a 20-something-year-old, you have to expect that people are going to make those types of comments. And you can't get that offended by every one of them, especially if one of them slips through and someone wasn't able to delete it overnight. That's the thing to me that's starting to get concerning, is that she is so involved. You wonder, is it altering his mindset around the job as well? I mean, you're talking about a guy, and I'm not saying that he would threaten to quit or something over that, but that's where your focus is at. You're so hurt over the fact that someone called you that. Like, dude, it is what it is. We've been called all sorts of names. I've been called that probably once or twice before. Now, it's probably behind my back and stuff like that, but like, it is what it is. Like, you just, I mean, honestly, you gotta move on from it, and you have to just think, look, what is the main focus here? You need to be focused on what is going on with Tar Heel football and what's going on the field. By the way, I want to make it clear, I've never been called a predator. I just heard what that sounded like out loud. That has certainly never happened. But I'm just saying, like, people, you guys get the gist of what I'm saying. People have said before stuff about me that I don't necessarily like. But you have to get over. You cannot let that affect you that much where you're sending that email. That email seems so insecure. And it honestly, it just makes you wonder, where is Bill's mind right now? Is he focused on the stuff that he's supposed to be focused on? on the field, or is he focused on what is going on social media wise, what Jordan is talking to him about in his ear, or worried about Belichick Productions? Like, why is that even a thing? I don't understand why that's even an entity. This should be something that is done by an outside production company that comes in and produces whatever you are wanting. If you want to have final say over it, totally understand. As a New York Giants fan, I understand why you'd want to have final say over it. But it should be an outside production company, not something that you are a part of. It just seems weird to me, man. That's what it is. It's just odd. And I think it's okay to be a little scared by how involved she is. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast, guys. Let us know, are you guys concerned over Jordon Hudson and her involvement in the program? Are you concerned about the amount of guys that enter the transfer portal for Carolina in the spring window? Is that something that has you thinking that things are not going in the right direction? What do you think about the quarterbacks and the possibility that Carolina adds one? We want you guys to get in on the conversation with us. Even if you are watching back, you can comment and we can respond to you guys. So make sure that you do that in the comments section. But we want to encourage you, head over to the website, heeltoughblog.com. Plenty of great stuff up there for you guys to check out. We've got all of the articles from yesterday. I'm just exhausted thinking about the amount of articles that I wrote yesterday. As I mentioned, you had 14 scholarship guys enter the transfer portal, at least 13, possibly 14 with Jaffer Murphy entering as well. We're not sure whether or not he was on scholarship or not. So, we got all those articles up there. I did not write one about the walk-ons. I may write one tonight about those guys. If we don't have any other portal entries, in case you guys missed the latest one today, Julian Randolph, he's up there for you guys to check out. So make sure you're looking at all of that, and definitely go back and read the articles about the guys that we landed. Learn a little bit more about these guys, because I think Carolina's got some guys that can be very productive for them this year. In Gabor, as well as now I'm blanking because there's so many names that have been running through my head. Adrian Wilson as well, and Jacob Horvath. So make sure you go back and check that out. We do have an article way back through all of it. If you can go back and scroll through and find it, about Gio Lopez and the interest that Carolina had in him. So make sure you guys go back and check that out as well. All of your coverage from the transfer portal to what's been going on with spring practice, what we saw the other night out there at the Practice Like a Pro event, that article's up there too. We've got you covered with all that. And if Bill Belichick speaks, we'll have an article up about that, but I wouldn't hold your breath, unfortunately. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, still some murmurings that Carolina could potentially be getting involved with someone else in the transfer portal, especially if they were to lose Drake Powell to the NBA draft. Still waiting on his decision. When we get it, we'll give that to you guys. And any other news coming out around the basketball program as we get ready to head into the offseason, we will have you guys covered with all of that. So make sure that you're on the website checking it morning, afternoon, and evening, especially during this time with all the portal stuff going on. And the best way to do it, guys, is just go to the Twitter page, follow the Twitter page, and turn on those post notifications. Anytime that we put up a new post, you'll get that notification, and you can go right there and read the article. That is the best way to get it done. Also, head over to that Facebook page, give it a like. We'd really appreciate that. And subscribe to both podcasts wherever you get your podcast. So that wraps it up for this edition of the show. Once again, want to thank you guys for watching, and those who will eventually go back and listen. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. And as always, go Tar Heels.